Back in one of my first videos about Bspwm, I said I had no idea how rules worked, but it turns out that looking at them, they're actually incredibly simple and way easier than I thought they were. So let's actually have a look at how they work. So if you're new to this channel, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs and any help would be really appreciated. So now that's out of the way, let's get started. Good afternoon everyone and welcome back to the channel. So this video is going to be mainly focused on some examples. I'm going to show you the documentation for the rules and then I'm going to jump into some things that I'm actually using them for and then talk about some other things that you could potentially use them for. So with the rules, they're actually very simple, but you can do some pretty cool stuff with them if you think that they actually make sense in your system. So let's actually have a quick look at the documentation before we get into anything else. So this is just my terminal up here. Let's go into the man page. So we jump down to the rules section. So when I first looked at this, I thought this was fairly confusing, but now that I have understood how monitor selectors, desktop selectors, and node selectors work, that's the reason I did those videos before touching this one. It's actually very simple and I don't see any difficulty working with it. So there's a couple of options in here. So we've got the -A option, so this will add a new rule. You've also got the -O option, which doesn't actually have documentation for, but what this will do is it'll say only run this rule once, and that's actually one of the fundamental things we're going to use for one of the examples that I've got a bit later in the video. So next up we have remove. So I'll show you what I'm using remove for, but it's actually very useful. And then lastly we've got list. So if I want to list out the rules that I have right now, so Bspc rule-L, we can see that I've got two rules right now. So I don't really understand this syntax, but this is basically saying that MPV will be opened in state full screen and screen key won't be managed. So let's actually have a look at what some of those states mean. So I didn't actually understand that this was actually mentioned in the documentation earlier, but if we look at state, so I've mentioned how I didn't actually know about this in previous videos, but so we've got state here. So this will say what the different window states are. So we've got tiled. So you know what tiled is. That's what your general tiling window manager uses. But we've also got a couple others. So like pseudo tiled. A tiled window that automatically shrinks doesn't stretch beyond its floating size. Okay. There's floating, which does exactly what you'd expect. And full screen, which also does what you'd expect. Now the other one that I wasn't sure about were these node flags. So let's actually have a look at some of them. So hidden is obvious. But what sticky does is one that I wasn't sure about. So this will stay within the focus desktop of the monitor. So if you were to make a sticky window on here, it would follow us around between each of our different desktops. So that might be something that you find interesting, or it might not be useful to you at all. So private will try to keep the same tiling position and size. So I believe what would happen with that, so if we created like this one down here, if we were to move this to a new desktop, it'll try to maintain its same size on that different desktop. Obviously, if there's not enough room for it, it won't do it, like you have a bunch of private nodes, but if it's possible, then it's going to try to maintain its size. So locked will basically make it so you can't close it with node -- close, which is cool if you're using the Bspc method to close. Not really useful if you're not. Marked will basically make it so it's easier to select the node. It'll put some sort of mark on it where you can be like, okay, I want to select that specific node. And then urgent is something that I'm still not sure about. Urgent, I guess, is just something that some programs will use for certain windows. I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure I've run across some urgent windows at some point, but I can't pin them down on anything. So let's actually have a look at those rules now, because I've kind of gone over explaining some other stuff. So what you do for this is you have to specify a class name or an instance name. Then you can optionally put in the one-shot. A lot of the stuff I'm not using one-shots for, but for one example, I do have it for. Then you have a monitor selector, a desktop selector, and or a node selector. You don't have to use all of them. You can use one of them. You can use two of them. It doesn't matter what you use. I think you have to use at least one though. I might be wrong. No, if it's in this syntax, then it's completely optional. So if you want it to just affect everything of that class name or instance name, then you don't have to use any selectors. So then after that, we can specify a state, a layer, a split direction, a split ratio, and then any of these, like hidden, sticky, any of these. So Also, then we can also specify a rectangle. So I'll show you what this actually looks like, because it's very simple, and it looks a little complicated from that, but it's actually really, really easy. Okay, so the first thing that I've got defined in here is this BSPC rule -r and then asterisk. So I would recommend including this as well, especially if you're going to be testing your configs, because what this will do is it'll delete any of the rules that were previously there. So it just will wipe everything, and then you can start from a clean slate. So I would recommend using that. Just even if you're using one rule, I would recommend including that. So let's have a look at the rules that I've got. So these are very basic. So this first one I've got in here says, when I open up a window of MPV, open it up in full screen. So this doesn't really do much on my system right now because I've got MPV already opening up in full screen through its config, but I might remove it from that, or I just might remove this line. This is just kind of here for the sake of testing. And then what this second one does is it'll say when a screen key window appears, don't include it within the node tree, so it won't try to actually manage that window. So if we were to change this one for MPV to something like Firefox, so I can actually show you what it looks like. So right now when I open up Firefox, it'll just open up as a tiled window. So that's cool and all, but let's say we refresh my configs, and that'll take a second to load back up. And now I open up Firefox. So we'll see that now it actually opens up within full screen state. So you could probably do a bunch of different complicated things with this. As I said, I've got my MPV like this, so you might have some other video player like that, or maybe you want, I don't know, your terminal to always open up in full screen, or you want some various other applications to always be in full screen mode, or in any other state. It doesn't have to be full screen. It could be you want everything in floating mode, or you want everything in pseudo-tiled. You can use this option to do that. So I don't really have a good example to show off manage, but if we look at this one in here, so this is a pretty cool one. So what this will do is it'll open up my ST window in floating state, and it also sets a rectangle for it and sets it to sticky. So what the rectangle does, this is the width, the height, the position in X, and the position in Y, I believe. Might be Y and then X. I think it's X and then Y. So what this will do is every time I create a ST window, so if I create them now, it just creates it as like a normal floating window, as a normal tiling window. But if I refresh my config, what this will do is, when that takes a second to actually finish, we load that up, and as we can see, it just opens up in this floating window here. So if I was to jump to a second desktop, as we'll see, this just follows me around. So if you're someone who thinks that's pretty cool, then that's going to be something you find useful. I don't think it's too useful for me, but I do have an example that could be potentially useful. I'm not using it right now, but it could be useful, and that involves making use of the -o option as well. So if we jump, instead of using my Bspwm configs, into my simplex hotkey naming configs, so this is an interesting one. So if we look at this command here, I've just copied this command. Obviously, if I was going to use it properly, I would actually put more thought into what I'm actually using. But for now, we'll just go with this. So the thought process behind this is, let's say you have some programs that you want to follow you around from each of your desktops. So some examples that I've got in here are things like my sound mixer, my terminal file manager, my transmission client, HTOP, NVim you probably wouldn't want to include in this, but also my calendar and also my notes app. So what I'm doing here is the exact same thing that I was doing before, where I'm running Bspc rule -a on ST, setting it to state floating with the same rectangle, and setting it also to sticky. But if you notice here, I've also got this -o option in here that I didn't have previously. So what -o does, I mentioned it earlier, is this will only run the rule once. What the rule says here is this will run on every single ST window. So the reason I'm not using it without the -o option is because that will then run for every single instance of ST. I'll show you in just a moment how you actually get these names to put in here, but just go with it for now. So what we're doing instead is only running this rule every time we need to use it, not running it constantly. So this will let me still use my ST window in tiling mode, but also let me use it within this floating mode like this. I'll reload my simplex hotkey naming config. So now let's say we want to open up something like LF. So this will actually open up within the floating mode. So if we see like this, it's opened up in this floating window we set up before. It's the same with something like transmission or with HTOP. So we can see like that opens up within that same floating window. And if we jump to, say, desktop 2, that follows us around. So the thought process, as I said with this, is these are these sort of windows that you might want to follow you around between each of your desktops. Personally, I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather just jump to the desktop that has it in full screen mode. But if you're someone who wants to have some floating windows that follow you around, I would recommend doing something like this. It's actually very useful in that case. But as I said, it's not personally the kind of thing that I like using. So how do you actually go about finding these actual names that I'm using? So that's very simple. I've mentioned it previously. So if you've worked with Compton or PyCon before, you probably have this program installed. It's called Xprop. So what Xprop will let you do is actually get some window manager class names. So if we run that now, let's say we click on this window here. So this prints out a bunch of information, but the line we're interested in is this window manager underscore class. So in this case, it says that this window is called ST-256 color. What this is basically is the name that you need to use. So if we open up, say, Firefox now, then we run Xprop on this, then we'll see that the name of this is either Navigator or Firefox. So you could use either of those names. Or if you say you want the name of your desktop, in this case, it is root or Bspwm. So that's how you get those names. You've probably seen that before if you've done anything with Compton, but I thought it'd be a good idea to mention it in this video as well. So as I mentioned before, I don't really see much of a use for Bspc rules, but I'm sure that you can do some really cool stuff with them. Like, for example, let's say you wanted your GIMP client to always be in floating mode, for example, or as I mentioned before, you want some certain apps to follow you around, then you can use the -O option. And there's a bunch of other cool stuff you can do with that if you just combine those options together and come up with some interesting ideas for things that you want to do. So I think that's pretty much everything for Bspwm rules. So if you like this video, remember to smash that like button and leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think. One more video I've got left on Bspwm, and that'll be on the query syntax. So keep your eyes open for that one. I'm not sure when it'll be out, probably in like 2 or 3 days from the time this one goes out, but we'll see when I feel like actually uploading this. So if you want to see that video when it comes out, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs and any help would be really appreciated. Up on that corner, I've got the playlist that this video's in. So go check that out if you want to see other videos like this. Down below, I've got my Discord. So if you want to chat with me, that's the best place to go for that. I will respond to comments on YouTube, but I'm far less likely to actually get into a conversation on YouTube. I've also got my library, so if you want to see my videos on a platform that isn't YouTube, right now that's really the only place you can go. At some point I might expand to somewhere else, but right now it's just library outside of YouTube. Also, I've got my support links, so if you'd like to support the channel, then I've got a couple of crypto wallets. I think it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, and LBC at this stage, and also my Patreon and my PayPal, so feel free to use any of those if you'd like to support the channel. It'll be really appreciated, but obviously you don't have to do it if you don't want to, so don't feel pressured to actually support the channel. Lastly, down below, I've got my Twitter and my Mastodon, so if you want to get video updates, that's the best place to go for that, because YouTube can never be trusted to actually give anyone notifications when the videos come out, so go follow those. And I think that's pretty much everything for me now, so I'm out.